Hello everyone, R. Jerome Harris from epiphatic.com. Hope everyone is doing well. In this video presentation, I'm going to talk about and answer the question, what is the forbidden fruit mentioned in the book of Genesis? Now, I'm sure many of you heard, maybe perhaps have seen on pamphlets portrayed in art, film, and literature that the forbidden fruit is an apple. Well, when one examines the contents of the book of Genesis, one does not find any reference to apple. Some may believe that the forbidden fruit is sex. No. So no, it was not sex. So in this video, I want to answer that question as to what the forbidden fruit is. And quite frankly, this is something that is not really being discussed. And also what I'm going to do, I'm going to tie in this discussion and something Jesus had said concerning eating his flesh and drinking his blood. Now, that's something that many persons who don't know the teachings of Christ tend to distort. So that's going to be in another video. So this is a part one, and in a part two video, I will tie in what's being discussed here with regards to what Jesus taught, or what Jesus meant with regards to eating his flesh and drinking his blood. Okay, if we go to the book of Genesis here at chapter 2, I've pulled up here on Bible Gateway, and if we scroll down to verse 9, right here, we learn here that the Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow out of the ground. Trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. Now, in the middle of the garden, God planted two special trees. Now, these trees are special because they are placed in the middle of the garden. And as we continue reading here, you will see exactly how special they really are. Now, it says here that in the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, there are those who will say, well, God placed the tree of the knowledge of good and evil there for a test for the man. No, that is incorrect. God placed that tree in the middle of the garden, as he did with the tree of life. He placed that tree in the middle of the garden so that the man could partake of it when the man was ready, when God saw fit that the man was ready. Let me use an analogy to explain this, okay? A mother who has an infant, a newborn infant, would not feed her child solid food. Why? Because that child would choke on it. The child's system would not be able to digest solid food. And most likely the child would die. Also, would a mother leave it up to a newborn infant's own devices to feed itself? No, the child would not be able to feed itself. The child would have to rely upon the mother to feed it until in such time the child would grow, mature, and be able to feed itself. It would learn to feed itself and then walk on its own 2 feet and sustain itself. So now if you look at the man, even though he was a man created by God, he was still essentially an infant. And he had to rely upon his creator to take care of him. That's why God planted all the trees in the garden, so that the man could partake of them, with the exception of the one which we're going to see in a few moments. But the man had to rely upon his creator to take care of him and nurture him to a point of maturity to where he will be able to partake of the more solid fruit on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So that tree was not put there as a test for man. That tree was put there so that man would in time partake from it. But in his infantile state, he could only rely upon the other trees in the garden and the tree of life. God did not forbid man to eat from the tree of life. Now let's continue on down to verse 15, beginning at verse 15, where God had laid his command upon the man. Keep in mind, the woman had not come on the scene yet. So the command that God gave was to the man. Now, you're going to see later on that the woman did know what God's command was, but God did not give that command to the woman directly. It was up to the woman's head, her husband, Adam, the man, to translate and give God's command to her. Okay, so beginning here at verse 15, it reads, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." Verse 16, "And the Lord God commanded the man, you are to eat from any tree in the garden." Now notice what it says here at verse 17. "You must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Now, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I want you to notice the many times eat is referenced here, because you're going to see this a whole lot as I continue with this discussion. Eating. Eating is the key to understanding what the fruit on that tree of good and evil was. Okay? Now, there, verse 17, God is telling the man here, look, if you eat from the tree, see, he says, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat, you will certainly die. So there was something on that tree that the man was not to eat, because if he ate from that tree, he would certainly die. So if it comes down to verse 20, we see here that the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. So here we see the creation of the woman. Now, if we go over to chapter 3 of Genesis, things get really interesting. And as I am reading through that, I want you to also notice the numerous times eating is referenced. So now we see here that the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord had made. Now he said to the woman, you see, it's interesting that the serpent would approach the woman. Why? Because she was even more infantile than the man. In other words, she was younger than the man. Adam had been around for quite some time, and God had given his command to the man. And we know that the woman knew God's command. And where did she get it from? Her husband, obviously. Adam had passed on God's command that he gave him to her. Now notice what the serpent says to the woman. He's trying to trip her up. He says here, he said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Well, God didn't say that. God said to the man that he may eat from any tree in the garden except for the one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now notice how the woman counters the serpent. The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. But God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. Now there's a few things to unpack here. Was Eve referring to also the tree of life? It was also in the middle of a garden. God did not forbid man and her to eat from that tree. They were forbidden from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So she says, But God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. So the trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, both had some sort of fruit on it. Okay, they're trees in a sense. But what type of fruit did they have is what is going to be answered in this video presentation. And the woman goes on to conclude, you must not touch it. Now, God did not say that. God did not say that you can't touch those trees. He said you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or you will die. Now, the serpent at verse 4 says, you will not certainly die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is a key. And again, notice all the references to eating. You see, eating. Now let's unpack this a little bit more here at verse 4. When the serpent says, for God knows. So what does this imply? The serpent knows its creator. It knows its creator because he says, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open. So obviously here, the serpent is lying. The first lie is right here at verse 4, where it says the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You see, so the serpent had some of this right, but there's one thing about a lie. A lie can sound good. It can smell sweet. It's like, a lie is like taking a clear glass of water. To look at it, it looks clean and pure. But if you add one drop of poison, let's say cyanide to it, it still looks clean. It still looks pure, but it's deadly. So he made that lie look good and attractive to the woman. So this has a whole lot to do with eating something from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, verse 6, now this has something to do with eating from that tree, eating the fruit from that tree. What is that fruit? The question is answered. It's right there before our very eyes. Let me read this to you. I'm going to take you back to chapter 2, then we're going to come right back here and resume at verse 6 in chapter 3. So back at Genesis chapter 2, we scroll down to verse 17. Here God is commanding the man, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There it is. What is that fruit on that tree? It's knowledge. It's not an apple. It's knowledge. Take a good close look at that. You must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Knowing good and evil. It's knowledge. Let me use that analogy of a mother and an infant. A newborn baby is concerned about knowing good and evil. A adult mother is going to have some understanding of what is good and what is bad. But a newborn infant, that's something it's not going to worry about. It's going to rely upon its mother or its parents to teach it what is good and bad, what is good and evil. When God forbade the man from eating the fruit, that's the knowledge from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, if man would eat from that tree, he would die. Just as an infant who ate solid food would die. The man in his infantile state was not ready to eat the solid foods or fruit, and that knowledge was the knowledge of good and bad. That is, knowing what is good and what is bad. That's why we're in trouble to this very day. We do not know what is good and what is bad. Now, each one may define for him or herself what is good and what is bad, but none of us know what is good and what is bad. We would like to think that we do know. That's why Jesus would say, why would you call me good? That is referring to himself. He says, no one is good but God. And what the serpent did was he accelerated things and pushed man in a direction away from God. So here, chapter 3, verse 4, what did the serpent say to the woman? He says, you will not certainly die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat, that is, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Today, the will of mankind, while it may claim it believes in a deity or believes in God, it really does not. Mankind thinks itself to be deities, to be God. And we tend to proceed on our own accord and then drag God into it. Let me give you an example. If God commands us not to kill, not to murder, what does man do anyway? Even man who claims he believes in God, he proceeds to make war with his brother. If Jesus teaches to love even our enemies, what do we do anyway? We hate our enemies. So we mock God and we play false to him, you see, because we think ourselves so lofty. The world of mankind really has not humbled itself before its creator. Another example what it could use was like back in Moses' day, when Moses led the enslaved Israelites out of Egypt. They found themselves encamped near the Red Sea. The Red Sea was to their backs, and Pharaoh's armies are charging towards them. Many within that camp began to panic. But what did Moses say? Moses essentially said to the Israelites, stand back and let God do battle for you this day. So what did God do? He stationed a pillar of fire in between Pharaoh's charging armies and the Israelites, and he made an escape for the Israelites through the Red Sea by parting it. Today, if the will of mankind truly believes in God, they would have the very same attitude. Rather than move forward on their own accord and make war with other people or the nations, it would say to itself, well, I believe in my God. I'll let him take care of it. I'll let him do battle for us today. But the nations don't do that because they don't really believe in God and they don't really have faith in God that God would do battle for them. Why not? Because those nations know inherently that they are evil. They know this. They simply pay God lip service. That's all they do. Because faith dictates that if you, whether you're an individual or whether you're a nation, an entire country, if you truly believe in God and there are enemies who are raising up against you, then you will stand back and let God fight your battles for you, not the nations. The nations will go make war, drop atomic bombs on another, and then after they've done their dirty deeds, then they'll call out to God. And in many cases, they'll even pray to God before they engage in mass murder and using weapons of mass destruction or any kind of weapon that causes a death. They'll pray to God for victory. What kind of sickness is that? The nations are without faith. And this is not just within Christianity. Even within Islam, you will find individuals who will pray to their God for victory over others. So in my view, all religion has its origins in a world that Jesus said that his kingdom is no part of. Each one thinks it knows what is good and what is bad. That is our problem. And the serpent's lie has come to fruition, where man thinks that he knows what is good and what is bad, and we don't. Now I'm going to take you down here to verse 6 of Genesis chapter 3. It says here that when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom. See, eating an apple only satisfies, say, a hunger pain. Eating an apple does not provide one with wisdom. So whatever was on that tree that the woman ate or would eat, she saw that it was desirable for gaining wisdom. See, again, keep in mind the many references to eating. So now we're getting very close to identifying even more what that fruit is. Like I answered that question, it's knowledge. It is the knowing of what is good and the knowing of what is bad or evil. So she took some and ate it. Again, she ate it. Now, who enticed her to partake of that knowledge from that tree? Again, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, the serpent. He enticed her to do it. And so she ate. Now, how does she eat it? It wasn't a physical eating with the mouth. She ate it in the sense that she listened to what the serpent said to her about her. If she ate from that tree, she wouldn't die. So eating is listening. You ever sit in a lecture, whether you're in high school or in college, and you listen to the teachers up front or your college professors? They're dispensing knowledge, and what are you doing? You're listening. You're eating. And what they're dispensing to you is fruit. What kind of fruit? The fruit of lips. The fruit of lips is mentioned several times in this book called the Bible. Let me show you one reference. And that's in Hebrews. We'll come right back here to Genesis chapter 3. So if we go to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 15, it says here, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. Notice how it references this praise here. The fruit of lips. So a person can speak. Let's say if a person used foul language, that would be rotten fruit. If a person used encouraging words or comforting words, that will be considered good fruit of lips. See, being spoken. So if we go back to Genesis chapter 3, and we come down to where we left off here, at verse 6, where the woman, she took some of that fruit. In other words, she listened to some of what the serpent was saying, and she listened to it. Again, the act of listening, well, let's back up. What the serpent was dispensing to her was fruit of his lips. See, fruit of lips. She listened, so she ate. See, that's the act of eating. Listening and eating is the same thing. So when she ate, she listened. Now that was in her system. That was in her mind. So she had taken on some new knowledge. See, by eating, by listening, eating. Then it continues. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Now think about that. The serpent used fruit of his lips, enticed the woman to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See, now she ate it. She listened. Then from her lips, she dispenses fruit of lips to her husband. He listened, thus he ate. See, again, listening and eating are the same thing. And as it says here, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. God never told them that it was bad to be naked. See, prior to eating or listening to the serpent and the man listening to his wife, they had no knowledge of whether or not being naked was good or bad. And so what they do, it says, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now, I want you to notice something here. Let me find it. It's something that God says to them. See, because here, verse 8, it says, the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord called out to the man, where are you? The man answers, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Now notice what God says to the man. God says, who told you you were naked? Think about that. Who told you were naked? I didn't tell you were naked. See, so prior to eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the man wasn't worried about being naked. He had no knowledge of being naked. So God is saying, okay, who told you were naked? So immediately God knew what had taken place here. Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? And notice what the man does at verse 12. Notice who he blames. The man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. And again, the reference to eating. Now, to cement this is something that the Most High God says to the man that tells us undeniably that the act of eating is listening to fruit being dispensed from one's lips. So we can see here where God says to the woman, what is this that you have done? The woman said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. Okay. She was honest. The serpent deceived me and I ate. So the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, okay, we see that the curse he placed upon the serpent. Down at verse 16, he placed a curse upon the woman with regards to her childbearing. But it's here at verse 17 that is most interesting. Notice what God says to the man. To Adam he said, because you listened to your wife. You see, that's like saying to the woman, because you listened to the serpent, so you listened to his fruit of lips. To the man, God is saying, because you listened to the fruit of lips from your wife, see, because you listened to your wife and ate the fruit from the tree about which I commanded you that you must not eat from it, curses the ground because of you, and so forth. You guys know the rest of that story. So the lesson here is that the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's not a literal fruit. It's not an apple. It's not sex. It's knowledge. It's a knowing of what is good and what is evil. The man, in his infantile state, being a new creation, simply was not ready to eat from that tree yet. He was not ready to know what is good and what is bad. That would take time, just as it takes time to nurture, for a mother or a parent to nurture its child, its newborn child, to maturity and teach it what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what is bad. And in future days, during Christ's 1,000-year kingdom over the earth, Christ will teach mankind, all who've died and resurrected, because all of us are going to die and be resurrected again to life here on earth, will all be taught what is good and what is bad. Remember when the day that Jesus died and he was hanging up there, in prayer, what did he ask the Father? He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They did not know. Christ's persecutors and executioners did not know that it was a bad thing to persecute him and then put him to death. That's why Christ would say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So therefore, to this very day, as I speak, none of us, not one of us, I don't care what church or religious organization you belong to, you, myself included, none of us know what we do. Why? Because we are flawed. We are imperfect. And when one is imperfect and we're flawed, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to sin. We're going to do things. We're going to say things that our inherent sinful nature is going to just come out and do. I saw an individual on YouTube a few months ago who came across, or he promoted himself as being someone who was a very devout Christian. And he really presented himself as one of those, walk on water type individuals. He has a very large following. Then about a week later, he was a part of a discussion panel, which included about 5 or 6 other persons, all claiming themselves to be Christians. And then the discussion got quite heated because now they were disagreeing with one another. They were discussing doctrine. And all the doctrine was not anything that Christ taught. It was doctrines of men, Trinity, hellfire, rapture, going to heaven. And they were just going at each other's throats. And things got so heated that one individual, he lost it. He absolutely lost it. He was issuing threat, intimidation, and saying, hey, meet me at this time, at this place, and they'll engage in physical violence. There was profanity being hurled back and forth. The individual came back on YouTube at another point in time, apologizing for his behavior. Yes, we all have bouts with anger at times, but what that told me was an individual like that, who is he presents himself as a leader to others and bringing others to air quote Christ, right? That let me know how deep into his system Christ's teachings have reached. They barely broke the surface. They didn't even get down into his marrow, into his heart. It didn't take much to set this person off. And he also has this very fiery and aggressive mannerism about him. And Christ was nothing like that. It's a lot of these preachers nowadays, especially the ones here in America, they have this fiery Elmer Gentry type personalities. And they're hurling fire and brimstone, and you got to get saved. And these individuals are a far cry from displaying the fruits of the Spirit. But hopefully, this has answered the question as to what the fruit on the tree that God forbade the man and obviously the woman not to eat from, and it was knowledge. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They were not to know for themselves what is good and what is bad, because once people start determining what is good and bad for themselves, now we have conflict. And we have conflict in the world today because individuals and nations are at war with one another or in some type of contention because each one think that what it is doing is good. Even the person who became the Apostle Paul, Saul of Tarsus, thought that it was a good thing to hunt down and persecute followers of Christ. See, in his mind, it was a good thing. The fruit on that tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the knowing of good and bad. It was knowledge, not an apple, not sex. This is R. Jerome Harris from eduphetic.com. Thank you for listening.